I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 sub 3, the committee is meeting in public on the actions of the longest ballot committee in recent Canadian elections. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I would ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the backs of cards and the tables. These measures are in place to help prevent audio feedback incidents, to help protect the health and safety of all participants, including interpreters. There's a QR code on your on the card, which will lead you to an awareness video. Reminder, though we have experienced witnesses here, all comments should be addressed to the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. There are no members on Zoom, but if anyone's coming in, just raise your hand on Zoom. I would like to welcome our witnesses. Jean-Pierre Kingsley, who was the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada from 1990 to 2007, and from Élections Québec, Jean-François Blanchette, the Chief Electoral Officer of Quebec. And so I will turn to Monsieur Blanchette for 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
5 minutes, please, Mr. Blanchet. Mr. Chair, Standing Committee members, thank you for inviting me to take part in the discussions on the actions of the longest ballot committee. As Chief Electoral Officer of Quebec, I am responsible for holding and organizing provincial elections. My mandate also includes investigating, prosecuting, and monitoring the financing of political parties. At the provincial election level, we have not experienced this type of issue. I will therefore share with you my observations on the events that occurred at the federal election level. I will also discuss my concerns and the recommendations that I made on the subject before the Quebec Commission on Democratic Institutions last April. I also wish to make the same recommendation to our elected representatives at an upcoming advisory committee meeting after the next provincial elections. The work of this committee, which I chair and coordinate, is aimed at obtaining the opinions of elected officials on issues related to the Election Act. I followed the federal election with great interest, particularly the issue of the proliferation of candidates, which is part of a movement to challenge the voting system. Like you, I saw the number of candidates on the ballot reach 40 in Mississauga Lakeshore in 2022, 91 in La Salle et Mer Verdun in 2024, and finally 214 in Battle River Crowfoot in 2025. I ask you, should election administrators be concerned about this movement? In my opinion, yes. We have at least 2 good reasons to be concerned about these activities, whose main objective is to challenge the voting system, not to get candidates elected. The first reason is that these actions interfere with the smooth operation of elections. They even irritate voters. As you know, overly long ballots require special logistics to fold and unfold them, fit them into the ballot box, determine the number of ballot boxes needed to count the ballots, and so on. This exercise unnecessarily lengthens the electoral process. As election administrators, we must provide exemplary service to all of our voters. Our staff is excellent, and we need to recognize this. The service provided to voters must be simple, fast, and efficient. The second reason is that these actions sow confusion among voters who must identify the candidate of their choice from dozens of candidates. As election administrators, we must ensure that voting remains accessible to everyone who is eligible to vote, including seniors, people with disabilities, and people who are illiterate. Currently, Quebec's Election Act does not have any measures in place to effectively address this issue. I believe that election laws should provide for a mechanism to limit the number of nominations filed solely for the purpose of making the ballot as long as possible. Solutions exist in some other Canadian electoral administrations and are currently in application, such as prohibiting a voter from nominating more than one candidate or increasing the number of supporting signatures required on the nomination paper. My recommendation is to prohibit individuals from being the official agent of more than one candidate in the same electoral district. Each candidate should have their own official agent and should show that they are serious about their candidacy. This would be easier to enforce than, for example, prohibiting a voter from supporting more than one candidate. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, I would like to thank you once again for inviting me to take part in these discussions. They are necessary to ensure the integrity of elections and to maintain the confidence of voters. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all chief electoral officers and all election officers at the municipal level and all of the staff at polling stations. I would be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Kingsley, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear committee members, thank you for your invitation. It is a privilege to appear before the Standing Committee on Procedure of the House of Commons, which I've been doing since 1997. I saw the testimony by Dr. Holly-Ann Garnett and the testimony by Stéphane Perrault, the Chief Electoral Officer. I will now change into English.
On an interview that I gave to the Globe and Mail on the topic before your committee. Not only is the long ballot initiative unjustified, in my view, it is also exceedingly disruptive to the act of voting, with very important consequences to which I shall allude. Elections are the process whereby the very legitimacy of Parliament, the very legitimacy of the members of Parliament, of which you are, is established. That's how we establish how we govern ourselves, and we must do it not only legally, but with legitimacy. In Canada, there is only one definition of an elector, and everyone has the right to vote except the Chief Electoral Officer in a federal election. From coast to coast to coast, there's only one definition. Every elector faces the same process when this is a general election, when they appear to vote in person. They also face the same process if they vote by at advance polls or by mail-in ballot. It is the same procedure for everyone in the same circumstance. The long ballot initiative vitiates that fundamental rule. I agree with what my colleague, Mr. Blanchet, just said about the disruption that it has on people who vote. We vote for many things when we vote for a candidate. And that process has to be as simple as possible, and we have made it as simple as possible in this country. We don't vote generally for other levels of government. We don't vote for referendums at the same time. Therefore, that's why that very gesture has to be protected. The difficulties for electors were alluded to, and I agree with them entirely. The difficulties for election administrators, I concur with them as well. And I will mention a few to highlight them. You need more ballot boxes. The handling of the ballot by the electoral officials is rendered much more difficult, to the point that the Chief Electoral Officer had to design a new mode of voting at the last election in Crowfoot, sorry, I forget the name of the riding. Battle River Crowfoot. I think we forget that electoral workers work a 15-hour day. And these are people who usually don't work at all. We're called upon to do an incredible service for one day. As for the rationale of the instigators of this initiative, who say that it should be a group of citizens assembly that should be forwarding this, and the MP should not have the right to establish the conditions of elections, I say that there exists means already under the Canada Elections Act to bring forth the proposal. If it's proportional representation, bring it forth into the electoral system as it exists, because the opportunities are there. You can join an existing party which has as its platform something that you feel very concerned about. You can create a political party. There were 200 and some candidates in the riding that I just mentioned in Alberta. 30 more, and you could have made yourself into a political party with one candidate. If you really feel strongly about something, field more candidates with that same party. That's what you need to do. If you want to do a citizens' assembly, get citizens organized. Call it an assembly if that is important to you. In a democracy, change requires work. It is not handed to you on a plate. It is more difficult to change a law than to protect it as it exists, because it was enacted by people who represented the people. That's how it was passed initially. In terms of recommendations for change, I agree. Signatories should only be for one candidate. That's clear. The form should say, where citizens attest to supporting a candidate, that they are supporting only one candidate. I want them to understand the import of what they are doing when they're signing that form. I don't want it at the top of the form. I want it under every box that has a signature coming to it, so that they don't say, well, I didn't see it because it was at the top. Under each signature. Official agent, only one per riding. Clear. In an election. Another thing that I think has been perhaps overlooked over the years is the role of the witness. The witness
Kingsley,
is defined as...
If you can wrap up, I gave you a bit more time in terms of your...
well, perhaps there will be a question about what the witness should do. I can take it very quickly. The witness right now is anybody. Doesn't have to be a resident, doesn't have to be an elector, doesn't have to be 18 years of age or over. And a witness should also be forced to sign his name over a statement that says, I have exercised due diligence to verify each signature and its appropriateness for this purpose. And I'll deal with penalties if there are questions about penalties. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll turn to the Conservatives. Mr. Culkins for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and I think we'll get right to that question, Mr. Kingsley. It's good to see you again. I might be the only one at the table that has been here, and you signed my first writ of return that hangs in my office from the 2006 election, which I think you oversaw. So I want to thank you for your years of service in overseeing elections Canada for as long as you have. I'm sure you've been watching the testimony here. I've advocated several different things. First of all, I thought the government of the day made a mistake in 2017 by not appealing the decision out of the Alberta court that removed the $1,000 bond. If I could just quickly get your thoughts on whether or not, given the shenanigans that have happened since that bond has been removed, do you think that there is enough of a case that could be made to reinstate that bond?
I would hesitate to do $1,000, sir.
Okay.
If it has to be reinstated, it could be somewhere in the hundreds, lower hundreds.
Okay.
To act as a kind of a natural barrier, but $1,000 becomes substantial.
Okay. Well, that was the argument that was made to remove by Mr. Szyszkiewicz, Kieran Szyszkiewicz, at the court, and he actually said that he made the case that it's there to protect the election from the integrity of the election from frivolous candidates. I would suggest to you that This is an orchestrated campaign by the longest ballot committee, which appears to be operating in the entirety of a structure of a political party. It's got central, we've heard witnesses here say that it's got central communications. It knows how to play the game. It knows what it's doing, and they're running multiple candidates in one riding. And while you might have mentioned several of the by-elections, they're also doing this during the general election as well. So if we're not going to have the bond, and if you think the bond is not there, what's the number for the number of signatures then? Because I would suggest to you that if it's 100, the government of the day in the last parliament suggested dropping that down to 75. How many is required? How many is sufficient? Is it 250? Because in some places like Nunavut or places where there's a lot of small, remote, rural communities, it might be difficult to get those signatures in an amount of time. So is that the solution?
Well, in my view, the solution would be somewhere along the lines of what I recommended. You can only sign once. And in terms of numbers, I thought the number of 100 did not create a problem in most ridings, and in the rural ones, it's 50 that is required.
That's right. Yeah. But now if you've got 200 candidates, each with 50 signatures, and we've heard the current electoral officer say that it's hard to even find employees to work elections, how many more staff and how many more resources would it take to cross-reference 200 candidates at 50 to 100 signatures apiece to make sure that they're all individual? That's a lot of bureaucracy, is it not?
I agree with you, and that's why I'm saying it should be, you can only sign once. So if you get 100 people who sign one another's documents, that doesn't fly anymore with the recommendations I've made.
Okay. And I think you've both intimated that you should only be an official agent. Mr. Blanchette and you, Mr. Kingsley, have both said that you should only be an official agent in one riding. That makes sense to me in terms of a by-election. But should you be allowed to be the official agent in 343 different electoral districts?
My answer would be no.
So
because it's a ridiculous situation.
Well, yes, but
it's
I mean,
ridiculous.
But
so
you did. I'm just getting clarification, sir.
Yeah.
Should you be allowed to be the official agent just for one candidate and one candidate only for the entirety of the general election, or just for one candidate in a constituency during a general election?
The reason I did not elaborate on that is because I do not know what the practices are for political parties. I don't know if political parties favor one agent for a number of candidates, 10, 15. And I said, I'm not going to go there so that I don't make a recommendation of which I do not understand the consequences. But ideally, I would easily have no problem living with only one riding.
Okay. Mr. Blanchette?
Dans le fond, l'idée, c'est que
The idea is that there should be one official agent who has a single candidate per riding, and that would not prevent an official agent from having candidates in other ridings. In Quebec, there are parties that have a single official agent for 125 candidates, but it would be somewhat unusual for a candidate. I'll give the example of the federal level is the same for the Liberals and also for the Conservative Party. That would be unusual. So you wouldn't have that an official agent in Quebec that is represents more than one political party. You can have one single candidate per riding, and so you can be an official agent in a different riding.
At a time, I'll go back to you, Mr. Kingsley. Given I believe that it was a travesty of the election. The longest ballot committee's actions made a mockery of our election process. Does the election law need to be changed so that people can actually? I asked the question of Mr. Thomas Shuskevich when he was here if he'd been reprimanded, charged, or faced anything like that. Should there be some provisions in the law for those who make a mockery of our electoral system?
Very short answer.
Yes, there should be. And the Commissioner of Canada Elections should determine whether it's a compliance agreement, a fine, or prosecution before the courts. And I will say one thing, if it is a candidate, whether elected or not, that willfully participated in this, I think the solution should be in a court of law before a judge in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Calkins. Madame Brière.
Ms. Brière, you have 6 minutes.
Deux témoins, merci de...
Good morning to our two witnesses. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your testimony as well. I heard the announcement by Minister Champagne yesterday concerning banking fraud, and I'll bring you there away from the longest ballot because my colleagues will ask questions on that issue. It was said that AI, deepfake, and related issues will become the number one danger to be monitored in the coming years. So I'd like to hear from you on how we can ensure that our elections are still reliable. What can we do to ensure that AI and deepfakes and misinformation and disinformation don't play an unfortunate role in elections? Thank you. Answer. Well, we're getting away from the main issue here, of course. But in all electoral districts in Canada, Elections Canada, and elsewhere, we are on top of what is happening on this issue. We are monitoring what's happening internationally and their best practices. Artificial intelligence is evolving daily. We hear about it all the time, and it is evolving faster than legislation currently. So what we must ensure is that we maintain control on information, correct information, and that we are able to make it available to voters. And Election Canada had a special committee that was monitoring that and interference. And it is considered problematic at this time. We're at the very beginning of the process, but we are looking at what is happening, and we will make recommendations in Quebec. And a section was added to Bill 98. There is a criminal infraction to people who voluntarily misinform or disseminate disinformation knowingly. Like any criminal offense, they will have to show that it was done with intention. So there is the burden of proof, but it is a start. I would invite you to be vigilant and to make the necessary amendments as needed. And above all, please don't wait. If you look at the longest ballot committee, it is a way to discredit the electoral process. And we need to maintain voter confidence in our electoral system. And when you look at what's happening elsewhere in the world, it doesn't take much to fall into a climate where democracy is questioned. So I would invite you to be vigilant and to act accordingly to ensure that our system remains one of the best in the world. It makes voters' perceptions more fragile. It makes confidence in our system more fragile. Answer. Citizens are questioning everything these days, the electoral system included. We must ensure we have our part of our work to do, and you also have your work to do. So it is a shared responsibility that we must assume. Mr. Kingsley, I've been thinking about this. If a message contains a component of AI, it should say so. It should say who conducted the artificial intelligence. It should have the written permission of the individual if their image or voice is used in the AI. In other words, we can't take your photo without your permission. And the other element, if someone starts using messages, we should consider removing the anonymity allowed by the system. It's been defended as being freedom of expression, but every freedom comes with a contingent responsibility. And if you look at the freedom, if you don't assume this responsibility, it is not a freedom of expression anymore. I hear your comment, but the use of AI, to take a more concrete example of deepfakes, it is done in bad faith. So trying to seek out approvals of the person imitated, in my opinion, is a bit utopian. Well, perhaps that's a bit too strong, but it's difficult. All that considered, what is your answer to people who use deepfakes? Well, there's nothing wrong with being utopian. And second of all, I think there is a way to control who is doing what in Canada with social networks. And we allow everybody to do whatever they want. There are people from Europe who come to Canada, to Montreal, and they were talking about what they're doing. And in other words, as soon as we confront an issue, we need to find solutions. There are solutions. We need to find them. We need to be able to make sure that we allow freedom of expression for those who are ready to confront their opinions. And those who are not ready to confront their opinions, well, we deprive them of doing that. Ms. Normandas, 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you to our two witnesses for your presence. It's very appreciated. I'd like to start with an open question to both. We started this study of the longest ballot committee, perhaps forgetting to ask, for whom are we doing this amendment to the Elections Act? And you talked about this in your speech. You talk about the right of voters to have uniformity in the ways they vote, the right of elections workers to have a healthy work environment. And on the balance of that, there is the right of someone to become a candidate in an election. So I'd like to know, if we make an amendment to the Elections Act, who should we be thinking of first? Is there some type of hierarchy between the rights of people we need to think of in terms of amending the Elections Act? I'll answer first. The voter first. The media, the political parties. In that order, the voter must come first. Electoral workers, third or fourth. They're not the main concern. Voters are. Thank you. Mr. Blanchet, I agree with the idea that the voter must come first. The right to be a candidate is also important. We think of our workers, of course. It needs to be achievable. Their work needs to be achievable. So they would come third, I would say. But all that we do must be easily applicable, because you know that workers at the polls in Quebec, there are 60,000 people who work a single day. They don't have a lot of a time. I think it's 300,000 people in Canada who'd work. And they want to serve their communities. And so you don't want to dissuade them from coming back at the next election. I think that the 4 ridings were the longest ballot committee. I'm not convinced that the polling staff will be eager to come back the next time. So there you go. Thank you. I'd like to correct my response to support what my colleague said. The voter, the candidate, and then the political party, and then the polling staff. Thank you. It's corrected in the blues. A more precise question for you, Mr. Kingsley. In your recommendations, you talked about having a person can just sign one candidate's papers. I'd like to know how we strike a balance between this and the fact that at the beginning of the campaign, we don't know who we're going to vote for. That's the role of an election campaign, to convince people. And also the technically secret nature of the vote. So if we sign papers, are we not declaring our allegiance? Is there a risk by limiting to one single signature? Answer. I would imagine there is a risk, but the risk already exists. There are people signing, and it's the same thing now. Obviously, someone who signs infers a type of political allegiance, and I don't think that requiring more signatures will dilute that allegiance. So if you sign multiple false candidacies, that dilutes things in my opinion. A question for you, Mr. Blanchet. You spoke about the idea of having a single official agent per riding. You set aside the other options of more signatures, 1,000 signatures, tabling. Can you tell me why some of those options seemed less relevant to you? I'll start with the tabling. So that was withdrawn in Quebec in 1980. I don't think that we would go back on that issue. However, well, signatures are technically difficult to apply. I think I learned listening from Mr. Kingsley at the federal level, anyone can support a candidate, so you don't have to be on the riding list. Is that correct? Yes, it's the witness. The person who signs as a witness can be anyone. So the difficulty is a technical one. You'll understand that we need to ensure that someone didn't support two candidates. It's difficult, and from my perspective, and it's just my perspective, I think that it is possible that someone could want to support more than one candidate. People have respect for those who run for office. I think they might support someone because someone wants to launch their political career without necessarily supporting their political party. But there's a difference between supporting two candidates and supporting 100. So that's not what we're seeking out. But I know, having heard Mr. Perrault, the idea from his perspective is that perhaps there could be an offense for those who incite people to sign multiple candidates' papers, and that it's once again, in the current case, that concerns us. It's obviously someone inciting people to sign all of the candidates' papers on a given table, and I don't think we should have to review all of the signatures with a fine-tooth comb. But I can understand that to address the issue, I think you need to take a multi-pronged approach, and there isn't a single solution. But the official agent issue is not in and of itself enough.
On to our next round. Mr. Jackson, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. A pleasure to meet you both before committee started this morning, and very glad to have your expert testimony. We've had a number of experts from different political fields, so I appreciate your comments and your opening statements, both very specifically about the official agent piece and the signatures piece. I think we're hearing from experts that they seem to feel that those are reasonable restrictions to put in place in terms of 100 unique signatures, as well as one official agent per riding. I would just like to talk about the signatures piece a little bit more, and perhaps to you, Mr. Kingsley. Your successor, Mr. Perot, was here, and he was very clear that the checking of signatures would be very difficult to do, that it's not currently being done. And so, in your experience, what provisions would need to be added to Elections Canada, their roster, to be able to actually meaningfully check signatures to make sure that if this provision is put in place, that they are unique to each candidate, should the committee and indeed the House of Commons decide to enact such a change?
Well, when Mr. Perrault said that it was difficult to check, I presume he meant it was difficult to check from candidate to candidate. Because right now, the returning officer has an obligation under the law to check each signature. That's in the statute as it exists now. Now, I don't know if technology exists now, but the names are printed. It may be possible to photo that and keep on doing it and get the computer to check them as they come in, because you have so many days left in the election to allow that to happen. If we're talking about a normal riding with 7 to 10 candidates, in my mind, it may become something that is possible. It would add responsibility to the returning officer, but he must also remember the returning officer, he or she also has staff. And I think it becomes something that can be envisaged in my mind.
Just to follow up on that, an example was given to committee by Ryan Davies from the Northern Perspective. I don't know if you watched that testimony, where they had photographic evidence that had been posted by longest ballot committee members on social media accounts of pages of signatures that did not have a candidate's name at the top of the sheets when the signatures were being collected. Northern Perspective says they submitted that to Elections Canada for review, and Elections Canada said that they had no evidence that any claim or request for a review had been submitted. So I'm just curious to know the mechanism behind the scenes at Elections Canada about how a question mark around signatures would be investigated and could be either legitimized or not if there's a concern.
Well, the Chief Electoral Officer has the option of referring matters to the Commissioner if he finds that something is amiss in the process. If it becomes to the stage where remedial action cannot be undertaken to his or her satisfaction, and this is how the accounts of members of Parliament and of candidates are reviewed. They're reviewed by Elections Canada. Difficulties are reviewed and solved between the candidate and Elections Canada. And where they cannot, they're referred to the Commissioner. That's how that refers to. And there were, when I was there was about, if I remember, a couple of hundred references made at every election because it could not be resolved. So
you feel quite comfortable if 100 unique signatures as a provision were put in place that Elections Canada would be able to thoroughly vet those 100 unique signatures and ensure that they are in fact unique from candidate to candidate?
Well, one thing I will not do is speak for my second successor, but I think it is something that definitely needs to be looked at in terms of the technology that exists, especially as you have said. Another matter which might be possible, I don't know that this one becomes more difficult, would be to expose online the signatures of the people who have agreed to substantiate a candidacy, and let ordinary Canadians review that.
Interesting.
That may be more difficult because of the fact that you're talking about 343 ridings or whatever, and getting posted from each returning officer to head office. But, you know, technology is evolving so fast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's rare that we we
Feel
accomplish
better.
that feat, apart from Madame Normandin, who is exceptional at it. But Madame Kaibaga, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I'll spend a bit of time on this topic because I think it really interested the members who were affected by this stunt. Mr. Blanchette, in June 2025, the National Assembly passed Bill 98, which made a number of amendments to the Elections Act in Quebec. We spent a lot of time here talking about misinformation and how we manage misinformation. I'm wondering whether you think this bill will help counter misinformation, and if so, do you have an idea of who is responsible for managing misinformation, particularly when it comes from social media platforms? Sometimes my words escape me in French, but we talk a lot about these platforms and how we can review them, but I'd like to know, in your role, to whom does the responsibility belong, and do you think Bill 98 will counter misinformation? answer. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, Bill 98 introduces provisions to try to counter misinformation. It is a first step. We'll see what the implementation looks like. It remains just a first step. And we will have to demonstrate, unlike at the federal level, I have a power to conduct investigation. There's no elections commissioner in Quebec. I can prosecute and I can investigate, but in no case will there be sanctions during the election campaign. If an investigation is ongoing, and even if there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, we cannot finish the investigation in 33 days. It will come afterwards at best. So it is just a beginning, and people must have ways of verifying information and its fact and whether it is true, and platforms need to do this, and people need to be able to consult our information. But as an organization, we certainly don't want to start weighing in on misinformation against a candidate, because that would be entering the political game, and we want to remain distanced from that. I'd like to come back to that, because if we want to avoid political games between candidates, who does the role belong to for managing misinformation? Because on social media, we could find ourselves in a situation where there's external influence, foreign interference. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, who should be managing that? Well, who has the accurate information? Canadians. But who has the correct information? That's the person. I'd like to hear from you. That's the individual who holds the information. So, but bad actors use these platforms, and they don't. Their goal is not to inform. Their goal is to get ahead of factual information. Their goal is not to inform Canadians. So you think, so whose role is it to implement measures to ensure that Canadians have access to factual information? I understand that you can't act during the elections, but now we're after the elections, and misinformation is growing on the internet instead of dropping. So you think that whose role is it to manage that issue, and what measures should be taken by that person? What suggestions would you make? It is a responsibility that is shared. And of course, we as an elections organization, we are the reference for everything related to the elections process. So we invite people to consult our website and to see all of the information on the website, to see about what is factual about the election process. But if someone falls victim to misinformation, then it's up to that person to set their record straight, because they're the only one who holds the correct information and who can comment on whether it's true or not. So I'm not able to check whether information is true or not in my role. And I think that people need to consult serious media and a variety of sources of information, and so they need to consult a variety of sources of information. And it comes back to the individual to ensure that the information that they are accessing is accurate.
The remaining 3 slots is just to add an additional minute, so we'll go 3.5 minutes, 6 minutes, and 6 minutes, and then end our meeting today. So, Madame Normandin, 3.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais revenir.
Thank you very much. I'd like to come back to the type of hierarchy that we talked about earlier, with the voter first and then the candidate second, and make a second subcategory of candidate. We represent the major parties, but shouldn't we also have a thought in the recommendations that we'll make on the best approach? Shouldn't we have a thought for independent candidates who might have difficulty filling their forms with small political parties who might have a single official agent for all ridings, or candidates for major parties, but sort of no hope candidates, if you will, and they might have a hard time finding signatures. Do you think we need to balance all of these considerations for candidates who have a different type of profile from those who are from a major political party with a large base in their riding? Should we think of a diversity of political offerings for voters? I'll go ahead. I'll turn the question back on you. Before the longest ballot committee, were there specificities for different types of candidates? The answer is no. And so I think everyone was still successful in running as a candidate. So to your question, should we take into account the specificities for different types of political parties or independent candidates? My answer is no. There need to be measures that address the issue without harming those who want to run. And I come back to the official agent. In Quebec, there are official agents for a political party who can do all of the ridings. The important thing is that there's just one candidate per riding. If I may? Of course. All of those numbers in the Elections Act for candidates are always compromises. Compromises where we try to ensure that we respect the Constitution, because candidates have a constitutional right to run. But the courts have upheld the numbers that are currently required for candidacies. So it's hard to say, well, it's necessary. No, it's not necessary to reduce them. If you are a candidate and you want to be an independent candidate, you must find 100 or 50 signatures. And it will be more difficult for you than for an organized party. It's understood. But at least you can move forward with 100 signatures. I'll push you on that. And if we go up to 100 signatures, as has been suggested, would you have the same thought? That's one of the recommendations that we have to address. 100. I would maintain it at 100 and at 50. It needs to be a reasonable number. It would be very difficult. Thank you very much.
To Mr. Van Popta for 6 minutes, please.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kingsley and Mr. Blanchette, for being with us here today. So we're talking about a possible amendment to the Canada Elections Act requiring 100 unique signatures for any serious candidate. Seems like a reasonable change, but I have a question about how that might work out in reality. And Mr. Kingsley, you had said that you would prefer a form where a person signing would have to declare specifically that this is the only form that they have signed. I think that you had said that, right? So that they've only signed for one candidate. What happens if a person signs more than one, either accidentally or intentionally? What's the remedy then? Would that candidate be disqualified? Would they not have their name on the ballot, or would there be a penalty for the person who signed more than one form? And earlier in your testimony, you were signaling you wanted to talk about penalties. Maybe here's your opportunity.
Well, I did identify penalties in an earlier discussion, but I agree with the Chief Electoral Officer. This does not result automatically in a suspension of a candidacy, unless it can be demonstrated that the candidate initiated the process. But that would require that it be done before the election, because you cannot suspend a candidacy once the election is over. That's finished. What you can do is, if that candidate was elected, though, that's why I said it has to go to a court of law. I do not see a remedy occurring at the Commissioner of Elections level for that. I think they should, if there's elements of proof, they should be submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the Director of Public Prosecutions should go to a court of law and determine what should happen to that after the election. And the judge may decide to start the election over, or he may decide something else, but that would be a decision of the court as opposed to an electoral authority. I think it's very important to remember, and I remember when I was the chief electoral officer, people thought the chief electoral officer sent people to jail. Only a court of law finds a person in Canada guilty of a crime under the Canada Elections Act. The Commissioner of Canada does not decide that. The chief electoral officer does not decide that. If you decide that you want to have a compliance agreement, that you sign voluntarily that you broke the law, that's one thing. You don't have a criminal record when you do that. If you're ascribed a fine by the commissioner and you decide to pay the fine, you're still not guilty of a crime. You've admitted that you broke the law, but these are very important nuances. But that's why my suggestion that if it's possible to ascertain before the election if people signed more than once, okay, it will occur, no matter what you put on that form. What that form is meant to do is to, the way I described it, is to appeal to the reasonableness of Canadians, which is an outstanding value in Canada, which Canadians have, you know, which many other countries don't have in their citizenship. It's to underline that. If it happened, did it occur because the person is innocent, is in thought, not thoughtful? It may. And if that's determined, that may well be the end of the story. And the commissioner can very well make that decision.
Thank you. There was a case, and reference was made to it in Alberta in 2017, where the same people who are behind the longest ballot initiative in the last couple of elections were the plaintiffs. And they were successful in convincing the Alberta court that the $1,000 deposit was unconstitutional as infringing Section 3 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but they were unsuccessful in a second argument in that same case about the 100 signatures. That judge said, no, that is not unconstitutional. It's perfectly reasonable. But now we're talking about taking it a step further and floating the idea that perhaps they should be 100 unique signatures. So clearly another hurdle for candidates to overcome. So in your opinion, Sir Mr. Kingsley, would that survive a charter challenge as either not infringing Section 3 of the Charter altogether, or if it did, that it's a reasonable infringement, reasonable limitation?
Well, not being a Supreme Court justice, I can only offer an opinion with very little weight behind it. I think it would sustain a challenge. A challenge would not succeed in overcoming the requirement that they be unique signatures. In light of what the objective is, it does not impinge the right to be a candidate at all, in no instance whatsoever. It does not touch the right to vote at all. Those are the constitutional rights we're talking about. And political parties don't have constitutional rights, by the way. They have rights by rebound, right of expression, right of assembly, but that's not touched.
Yeah, fair enough. I have a related question, and that is to do with 10, okay, well, it's going to take me longer than 10 seconds just to set the stage, so yeah, fair enough. Good, thank you.
Mr. Lewis for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you both to the witnesses for being here. It's an important study. We're talking about democratic integrity here in our elections, and I appreciate the service for both of you. I think it was your words, Monsieur Blanchette, when you said we do not want to fall into a climate where democracy is questioned, and misinformation, disinformation is allowing that to happen more frequently in countries around the world. One of the ways I wanted to know how we can help protect that democracy and fight against misinformation and disinformation, a previous witness said it's a supply and demand thing by supplying more information that's based on facts. So I would like to know maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Kingsley, how critical you think a free and independent journalism sector is to maintaining that election integrity, and how Elections Canada, and then after that, Monsieur Blanchette, can work with journalism and media to make sure that the right information is getting out there.
Certain aspects of that I will leave to Jean-François because of his more immediate. But there was a question earlier about who should be involved in implementing rules about this. And we have an organization called the Canadian Radio and Television Commission in Canada. It regulates broadcast media. Why can they not monitor social media? Why can we not require that social media register with Canada? And if they're foreign-based, there's a part of the Canada Elections Act which is called a third-party regime. And they should have to register as a third-party regime and be limited to the amount of money that they can spend in this country, as well as the veracity of what they transmit as messages. Thank you.
Même question?
Je trouve intéressant.
Same question. I think the answer by Mr. Kingsley was very interesting. I know that at the federal level, the people responsible for social media are much more open to working to guarantee that there are agreements signed. But at the provincial level, it's as though social media managers at the large companies don't really assign importance to provincial and municipal elections. So we have a challenge on that issue. We need to counter with the social media stakeholders to ensure that they support this, but it's a question of funding. And it will depend on what happens on our side of the border when it comes to social media openly supporting candidates. So it's difficult to work on and to have the last word with these platforms. Thank you.
To talk to you because you mentioned Bill 98 in Quebec, which would make it offense to knowingly disseminate false information, including AI-generated deepfakes. I know this is in its infancy, but you mentioned working with social media companies as well. How can we strike that balance? Because I also know in the same legislation there are exemptions for satire, for parody, which is, preserves our freedom of expression. So how can we, as a government, if we're looking into things that would protect freedom of expression while also stopping, misinformation from being used with AI or deepfakes?
Encore une fois,
Once again, Mr. Kingsley spoke about, from the moment that a message is controlled by AI, that the author should be identified. If it's satire, I understand that it can pass, but that we can't prevent comedians from, they have freedom of expression. We can't limit that. However, if it's not humor and people are truly seeking to provide misinformation systematically, and it is clearly the objective, then voters can complain and there will be an investigation. If, once again, we are able to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that the person is voluntarily doing this, then there will be sanctions. But it's not a perfect solution, and we're at the very beginning as well. And I'll compare it to an IT virus. When there were always antiviruses to counter them, we have to be trust in our organizations, and AI will harm, but it will also help in some cases to fight against misinformation.
Mr. Lewis, I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for being here today, and seeing no further business, this meeting is adjourned.